Continuing coverage of the $1.3 billion proposal to deepen the Cape Fear River.
The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is adjusting its report on that project, and WECT's Connor Smith learned some new details from the Army Corps. This decision comes a couple of months after one state agency formally objected to the deepening of the harbor.
Yeah, that's right. But USACE says the project is still pushing ahead. They are making some changes, but the agency says they largely disagreed with the state's conclusions. A controversial proposal to deepen the Cape Fear River is moving forward.
For us at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, there's been no change. We are still focused on our two tasks at hand.
Dave Connolly with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers says they plan on finishing their project report and environmental impact statement before July. USACE is making edits and additions to those documents, a result of thousands of public comments and a formal objection by state officials back in February.
Everybody's comments are definitely taken into consideration as we push the packet forward.
The project, estimated at $1.3 billion, would deepen the river from 42 to 47 feet. Advocates say that would let larger ships reach the port of Wilmington, keeping the port competitive with its peers. But critics, including NCDEQ in its objection, point to PFAS, flooding, and other environmental impacts. Cities, towns, and villages around the region have formally opposed the project. Bald Head Island and Southport have racked up more than $250,000 just in legal fees fighting the proposal.
When we're looking at expenses, things like legal expenses and coastal engineer expenses, a lot of that stuff is really a drop in the bucket when you look at the overall impact.
Connolly wouldn't specify what changes they're making to their report, but says they are minor.
We reviewed their objection line by line, and we determined that we are fully consistent with all federal and state current regulations.
After NCDEQ's objection, USACE could have paused the project and formally worked with them to address any concerns. That didn't happen. Instead, they're noting the concerns and moving the project closer to reality. And Connolly says the report and impact statement will be submitted in July to the Assistant Secretary of the Army. A decision on the future of the project will be made in October. Connor Smith, WECT News.